There is a reason some men stop explaining themselves and the room grows uneasy. Silence exposes what noise tries to hide. When you withdraw your reactions, you force others to face their own weakness instead of leaning on your attention. The tension you feel is not failure. It is a signal that control has shifted. When a man no longer wastes words, he becomes difficult to manipulate, and that is why your silence unsettles them. Lesson 1. Silence makes some men powerful because it removes the illusion that control belongs to the loudest voice in the room. When you refuse to react, you stop participating in the performance others rely on to feel dominant. They expect resistance, argument, or emotional display. When none arrives, the script collapses. Your silence forces them to confront themselves instead of using you as a mirror. This is why your silence unsettles them. It exposes how dependent they are on your responses to sustain their sense of authority. A man who does not rush to defend himself is not signaling weakness. He is signaling ownership of his inner world. You notice this most in confrontation. Someone pushes, provokes, tests your limits, waiting for noise to confirm that they still have access to your reactions. Instead, you stand still. The moment stretches. Their confidence thins. They begin to explain themselves, repeat their points, justify what moments earlier they delivered proudly. Silence turns confrontation into observation. You are no longer inside the exchange. You are above it, measuring without being measured. Power shifts quietly, without announcement, without declaration. The anchor is simple. Silence is not absence, it is selection. This discipline does not appear dramatic from the outside. There is no visible triumph, no grand gesture. But inside, you feel the difference. Noise pulls you into impulse. Silence anchors you in intention. You begin to see how many conflicts only exist because men fear the discomfort of stillness. They talk to escape uncertainty. They argue to drown insecurity. When you refuse to participate, the truth surfaces. Time has already proven this pattern. The man who reacts quickly is predictable. The man who holds silence is unreadable, and what cannot be read cannot be easily controlled. In relationships, the same law applies. Someone raises their voice, exaggerates emotion, tries to force urgency. Silence interrupts the emotional current. It denies escalation the oxygen it needs to grow. You are no longer dragged into their storm. You remain where you stand. They feel it immediately. The ground is no longer theirs. They begin to question themselves, their motives, their tactics. Your silence is not passive. It is a boundary without explanation, and boundaries that do not need to be spoken are the ones that carry weight. There is also a quieter dimension to this power. Silence turns rejection into self-possession. When you stop explaining your decisions, you stop asking for permission to live by them. You are not seeking approval. You are not broadcasting your reasons in hope of being understood. You are accepting the cost of autonomy. That cost is isolation from those who only respect men they can influence. They do not fear you because you are aggressive. They fear you because you are no longer available to be managed by noise. And as the room waits for a reaction that never comes, you learn how stillness hardens into presence, and presence begins to speak without words. Lesson 2. Silence makes some men powerful because it removes the constant supply of validation that others quietly depend on. When you stop responding, agreeing, reassuring, or cushioning their insecurity with your presence, something becomes exposed. They begin to feel the weight of their own uncertainty without you absorbing it for them. This is why they fear your silence. It reveals how much of their confidence was never internal. It was borrowed from your reactions, your attention, your willingness to engage. When that disappears, they are left alone with themselves, and few men are prepared for that encounter. You see this most clearly in moments where someone expects emotional participation. They bring tension to you. They bring complaint, accusation, or pressure, assuming you will enter the same emotional field. Noise is their method of control. It keeps you in their frame. But when you respond with disciplined quiet, the frame dissolves. They begin repeating themselves, speaking faster, raising their tone, as if volume could replace certainty. The silence does not cooperate. It does not soften the discomfort. It does not offer relief. It holds the mirror steady. And in that reflection, their dependence becomes undeniable. This is not cruelty. It is clarity. For years, many men spend their lives as emotional scaffolding for others. They steady the ground for people who never learn to stand on their own. They listen, explain, justify, reassure, apologize, and remain available because they believe endurance equals strength. But time has proven the pattern. Endless availability does not create respect. It creates expectation, and expectation turns into entitlement. Silence breaks that cycle. It refuses to confirm the illusion that your role is to carry what others refuse to strengthen within themselves. In professional environments, the same law applies. Some rely on constant agreement to maintain status. They test authority not through competence, but through pressure. They want reaction. They want visible effort. The man who stays silent cannot be pulled into that theater. He does not rush to defend his decisions. He does not argue to be seen as correct. He lets reality and consequence speak for him. This absence of performance unsettles them. Power that does not beg to be recognized becomes difficult to challenge because it does not exist in their approval to begin with. There is also a personal cost to this discipline. When you withdraw validation from others, you must also withdraw it from yourself. Silence forces you to confront your own motives. Are you quiet because you are avoiding conflict or because you are choosing control? Are you detaching from chaos or from responsibility? The stillness gives no immediate answer. It makes you sit with the discomfort you once escaped through words. And in that pressure, something new forms. A man who no longer needs to be understood hardens into a different kind of presence. He does not disappear. He becomes defined by what he no longer gives away. Lesson 3. Silence makes some men powerful because it turns impulse into leverage instead of surrender. When you refuse to react in the moment you are provoked, you do not escape the situation. You redefine it. Others expect immediacy. They expect emotion, defense, raised tone, or hurried explanation. When none appears, the rhythm of the exchange breaks. Your silence introduces delay, and delay changes power. The person who speaks first reveals need. The one who remains quiet reveals restraint. This is why they fear your silence. It strips urgency of its influence and exposes who is driven by impulse and who is not. You see this in conflict. Someone accuses you, pressures you, or tries to corner you into choosing fast. They want you inside their tempo, reacting instead of thinking. Noise belongs to them, but silence belongs to you. You stand still, and the pressure they built begins to collapse under its own weight. They talk more than they intended. They reveal details they meant to hide. They contradict themselves while trying to sound certain. What looked like strength becomes exposure. The anchor is this: silence turns reaction into position. This control does not announce itself. There is no visible display, no victorious tone, but beneath the surface, the imbalance is clear. When you respond instantly, you negotiate from emotion. When you wait, you negotiate from reality. Time has already tested this pattern. The man who answers quickly tries to win the moment. The man who holds silence shapes the outcome. He is not passive, he is patient. And patience, when applied with discipline, becomes pressure without movement. In personal relationships, the same principle cuts deeper. Someone demands resolution, forces conversation, declares urgency, insists everything must be settled now. Silence rejects the false emergency. You do not chase them into chaos. You do not match their escalation. You let the tension breathe until it reveals its origin. Was it truly important or merely emotional dominance disguised as honesty? They feel the shift when their urgency no longer commands you. They realize control requires your participation, and you are no longer volunteering it. There is a cost to this discipline. Silence denies you the easy relief of expression. You must carry the weight of what you choose not to say. You must sit with anger without releasing it through words. You must endure being misunderstood without defending yourself immediately. That pressure is not comfortable, but it hardens you. It forces you to separate what is necessary from what is simply noise. And as you learn to withhold reaction, you begin to notice how many situations dissolve when you refuse to feed them. The room waits for your response, but your silence holds the line, and the line does not move. Lesson 4. Silence makes some men powerful because it removes the emotional traps that others set to pull them out of themselves. When you stop explaining, defending, or proving your intentions, you deny people the hooks they use to control your responses. This is why they fear your silence. It refuses to join their drama, and without your participation, their tactics lose strength. A man who does not react on command becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability unsettles those who rely on emotional pressure to maintain advantage. You see this in arguments that begin small and grow into storms. Someone tries to provoke you, confident that you will rise to the bait. They want you angry, loud, or impatient because noise makes you easier to steer. But when you remain quiet, the escalation stalls. They circle the same words. They repeat their points. They add emotion where logic fails. The silence does not reward the performance. It simply exists, steady and unresponsive, and in that stillness, the manipulation becomes visible. The anchor remains clear. Silence is a boundary, not an absence. There are moments where silence is misunderstood as surrender. People assume you have nothing to say or that you are avoiding confrontation, but time has already shown how often restraint is mistaken for weakness by those who only understand force. Silence prevents you from saying what cannot be taken back. It protects you from commitments made under pressure and emotions that distort judgment. It does not remove you from reality. It positions you in front of it without distortion, while others drown themselves in their own noise. In relationships, this discipline shifts the entire dynamic. Some individuals survive on emotional turbulence. They need reaction to feel significant. They measure connection by conflict, intensity, or volatility. Silence denies them that fuel. You do not chase every accusation. You do not answer every demand. You allow the space between words to reveal the truth beneath them. The longer the quiet holds, the clearer the real motive becomes. Were they seeking understanding or power over your attention? Their discomfort answers the question more honestly than their voice ever could. There is also an internal confrontation within silence. When you choose not to react, you are forced to face the agitation inside yourself instead of releasing it outward. You notice impulses you once disguised as principle. You recognize how often your words were not strength, but escape. The quiet refuses to rescue you from your own restlessness. It makes you carry it. And in carrying it, you begin to see which conflicts were real and which existed only because you could not bear stillness. This kind of restraint does not draw applause. It is not dramatic. It is not admired by those who worship expression over discipline. But beneath the surface, it builds something heavier than approval. It builds presence. Others sense it, even if they cannot describe it. They hesitate before provoking you. They measure themselves before approaching you. Not because you threaten them with force, but because your silence reminds them that influence over you is no longer granted by noise, and whatever they say next will have to stand on its own. Lesson 5. Silence makes some men powerful because it unsettles those who have grown used to your compliance. When you stop agreeing out of habit, stop explaining yourself to maintain peace, stop softening your decisions so others can feel comfortable, something shifts beneath the surface. They do not fear your anger. They fear your refusal to participate in the role they assigned to you. This is why your silence disturbs them. It removes the assurance that you will continue to play along. A man who no longer explains his boundaries no longer negotiates his dignity. You notice this when people expect the familiar pattern. They apply pressure the way they always have. A demand is made, a tone is raised, a situation is framed to make you responsible for everyone else's comfort. In the past, you would respond immediately. You would clarify, justify, or bend just enough to restore harmony. But now you remain quiet. The absence of compliance exposes the truth of the interaction. They were not seeking dialogue, they were seeking obedience. Silence removes the illusion of mutuality and reveals expectation in its raw form. The discomfort you sense from them is not confusion, it is exposure. Without your agreement to smooth the situation, they must face the reality that what they called understanding was dependency. Time has already tested this pattern. The man who always yields becomes a tool. The man who withdraws his automatic assent becomes a problem. And in many environments, being a problem is the first step toward becoming a person instead of a function. The anchor stands firm. Silence withdraws permission. In workplaces, this becomes clear when silence replaces reassurance. Someone presents urgency and expects you to absorb it. They push decisions, leaning on your habit of rescuing outcomes that were never yours to carry. When you do not react, they begin to reveal the fragility behind their authority. They repeat instructions. They increase formality. They invoke pressure that no longer moves you. Your silence forces responsibility to return to its rightful owner. What was once disguised as teamwork now stands exposed as reliance. In family and relationships, the impact cuts deeper. People who built their emotional balance on your predictability feel something close to abandonment when your compliance ends. They accuse you of coldness, distance, selfishness, even cruelty. But beneath the accusation lives a single truth. They are no longer able to shape your behavior through guilt or expectation. Silence does not argue with their claims. It does not defend itself. It simply refuses to surrender self-respect in exchange for comfort. This discipline is not loud. It does not seek recognition. It often costs you closeness, familiarity, approval. You walk away from roles that once defined your identity, and the quiet that follows can feel heavy. But in that stillness, you begin to understand how often your compliance was not kindness, it was erasure. Silence returns you to yourself, and as the world around you reacts to what you no longer give, you stand inside a presence that no longer asks permission to exist, remaining there without apology, without explanation, without the need to fill the space you finally reclaimed. Lesson 6. Silence makes some men powerful because it strengthens authority in uncertain environments, where most people search for reassurance through noise. When situations become unstable, many rush to speak, to predict, to convince themselves they are in control by filling the air with words. But the man who remains quiet does something different. He refuses to participate in collective anxiety. He does not rush to interpret events before they reveal themselves. This is why they fear your silence. It reminds them that steadiness is not created by explanation. but by presence, and presence cannot be borrowed from another man's voice. You notice this in moments of crisis or confusion, when decisions must be made with incomplete information. Others talk in circles, offering opinions disguised as certainty. They ask questions they do not truly want answered. They search for agreement, not truth, because agreement gives the illusion of safety. You do not offer it. You hold silence instead. And in that absence, a strange reversal occurs. The more they speak, the more exposed their insecurity becomes. The more you remain quiet, the more your composure becomes the center of the room. Authority shifts, not through command, but through restraint. The anchor reveals itself. Stillness carries weight. This kind of authority is not dramatic. It does not rely on charisma or performance. It is built through tolerance for uncertainty, through the ability to stand inside disorder without reaching for the comfort of premature answers. Time has already proven this pattern. The man who needs to speak quickly does so to escape his own doubt. The man who remains silent does not deny doubt. He endures it, and endurance in uncertainty becomes power, because those who cannot hold themselves upright begin to lean toward the one who can. In leadership, this becomes unmistakable. A group faces pressure. Stakes rise. People want direction, but before direction, they want emotional relief. They want someone to tell them everything is simple, predictable, manageable. Silence refuses that illusion. You watch, you listen, you wait long enough to see what others are too restless to perceive. Decisions made in noise belong to fear. Decisions made after silence belong to reality. They may not thank you for it, but they recognize it. Their discomfort around your quiet is not mistrust. It is recognition that your authority does not depend on their agreement. In personal life, the same principle takes a quieter form. In moments of emotional disruption, when people expect reaction, comfort, or immediate reassurance, you do not rush to fill the void. You let the moment breathe. You allow truth to surface without forcing it into words too early. They may accuse you of detachment, distance, or coldness because they confuse noise with care. But deep beneath their frustration lives a subtle awareness. Your silence is not absence from the situation. It is refusal to collapse into it. This discipline also confronts you internally. Silence in uncertainty forces you to face your own desire for control. You become aware of how often you once spoke not to express truth, but to avoid vulnerability. Now, you stand inside that vulnerability without fleeing. You let doubt exist without disguising it. And in doing so, you discover that authority is not the removal of fear, but the refusal to be guided by it. Others sense this even if they cannot explain it. They watch the way you do not rush, the way you do not flinch, the way you allow uncertainty to pass through you instead of dragging you with it. And in that quiet gravity, they realize that some forms of power do not raise their voice. They simply remain. Lesson 7. Silence makes some men powerful because it exposes dependency in relationships and alliances that once appeared mutual. When you stop explaining your decisions, stop reassuring others of your loyalty, stop narrating your intentions to keep them comfortable, the nature of the bond begins to reveal itself. This is why they fear your silence. It removes the illusion that connection is built on understanding and shows how often it was built on access to your reactions. A man who does not feed constant reassurance forces others to confront whether they valued him or only the benefit of his availability. You notice this when people begin to ask questions that sound like concern but carry anxiety beneath them. They want to know what you are thinking, what you are planning, whether you are still aligned, still predictable, still within reach. In the past, you would answer immediately. You would explain yourself to calm their unease. But now, you remain quiet. The space between their question and your response stretches into something uncomfortable. They start to fill it. They assume motives. They project fears. They reveal dependence they once hid behind confidence. Silence does not accuse them. It simply removes the shelter that your words used to provide. This dynamic becomes clearer over time. Some alliances survive only when one man continues to explain himself. He must reassure, clarify, soften his edges, prove that he is safe to rely upon. When he withdraws that maintenance, the structure begins to shake. Time has already proven this pattern. Bonds built on honesty strengthen in silence. Bonds built on control fracture in silence. The anchor stands firm. Silence reveals what was real and what was merely convenient. In friendships, this truth can feel severe. A man who once tolerated disrespect or inconsistency now answers it with quiet distance instead of confrontation. He does not argue. He does not plead for recognition. He removes participation. The reaction from the other side exposes everything. Some reflect, adjust, and step forward with integrity. Others grow defensive, offended, or hostile because what they lost was not affection, it was influence. Your silence makes that loss undeniable. They realize they cannot summon you with guilt or demand your presence through expectation, and the absence of control feels like betrayal to those who never intended to meet you as an equal. In family, the weight becomes heavier. Expectations reach deeper. Roles are older. You were the one who absorbed tension, who yielded to preserve peace, who explained yourself to avoid conflict. When silence replaces explanation, familiar dynamics fracture. Accusations arrive. You are called distant, cold, ungrateful. But beneath the language, the truth stands unchanged. They fear a version of you that no longer depends on approval to define belonging. Silence does not destroy love. It destroys entitlement. Internally, this discipline forces a confrontation of your own. When you withdraw explanations, you must also accept the distance that follows. You can no longer control how others interpret your quiet. You cannot soften their discomfort or rescue their insecurity without breaking your boundary. Silence requires that you endure misunderstanding without chasing validation. It asks you to remain present without surrendering yourself to be understood on demand. And as you hold that tension, something shifts within you. You begin to see which relationships breathe in the silence and which suffocate without control, while you stand there, unmoved, letting the truth reveal itself in the space your words no longer fill. Lesson 8. Silence makes some men powerful because it reclaims energy from arguments that no longer deserve to exist. When you stop feeding conflict with explanation, defense, and emotional labor, you discover how many battles were never about truth. They were about control. This is why they fear your silence. It starves the argument of the fuel it needs to survive. The other person is left standing alone with their accusations, unable to anchor them to your reaction. A man who no longer invests himself in pointless conflict becomes difficult to exhaust, and exhaustion was the weapon many relied on. You notice this when conversations that once dragged on for hours now end in minutes. In the past, you explained yourself, clarified your intent, revisited the past, and tried to reach understanding through repetition. The argument only grew heavier. Each word you added tightened the net around you. But now, you withdraw your participation. Their voice continues, but the fight no longer has a partner. Silence reveals how circular the conflict always was. There was no desire for resolution. There was only hunger for dominance disguised as dialogue. The anchor stands clear. Not every fire deserves oxygen. This discipline changes the landscape of your inner life. Conflict once followed you long after the conversation ended. You replayed sentences, revised responses in your mind, imagined what you should have said. Noise lived inside you even when the room was quiet. Silence breaks that cycle. When you refuse to engage beyond what is necessary, the argument cannot follow you inward. It dissolves where it began. Time has already proven this pattern. The man who argues endlessly becomes trapped inside the words of others. The man who holds silence walks away with his energy intact. In workplaces, this becomes unmistakable. Some individuals create conflict as a method of influence. They provoke, accuse, question your competence, not to discover truth, but to place you on the defensive. If you engage fully, you confirm their authority over your attention. But when you answer only what reality requires and let the rest fall into silence, their strategy collapses. They repeat themselves. They escalate tone. They search for reaction that never arrives. Your restraint forces the environment to separate noise from responsibility, and responsibility begins to return to those who tried to avoid it. In personal life, the weight is sharper. Arguments, once disguised as concern, reveal themselves as attempts to maintain control. Someone demands explanation, insists you respond emotionally, frames silence as guilt. But you no longer enter the arena they built. You do not match urgency. You do not justify your boundaries through debate. You allow the quiet to stand in place of defense. They feel the separation. What once drained you now returns to you, and the absence of your emotional labor exposes how much of the relationship depended on your willingness to be worn down. Silence also confronts you with your own impulses. There were times you argued not because the conflict mattered, but because you needed to prove something about yourself. You chased validation through winning. You mistook exhaustion for integrity. Now, you watch the urge rise and refuse to obey it. You let the feeling burn without expression. It does not vanish immediately. It tightens in your chest, presses against your patience, demands release. But you endure it. And in that endurance, a different strength forms. The strength to let what is unworthy pass through you without claiming your life as its territory. This power is quiet, invisible, rarely celebrated. No one applauds the argument you did not enter, the attack you did not answer, the energy you chose not to spend. But you feel it. Your mind grows clearer. Your presence becomes heavier. Those who once drained you begin to hesitate, sensing that the well they drew from is no longer open on demand. They are left speaking into a silence that does not bend, does not plead, does not return to the noise it left behind. Lesson 9. Silence makes some men powerful because it becomes a boundary that others can no longer cross. When you stop arguing, stop defending, stop offering endless explanations, you are no longer participating in negotiation over your own limits. This is why they fear your silence. It marks the point where influence ends. People who were once accustomed to stepping past your comfort, your time, your emotional capacity, now meet something they cannot move with pressure or persuasion. They stand before a wall that has no door, no invitation, no weak point to exploit, and the absence of access unsettles them more than confrontation ever did. You notice this when someone tries to reopen a conflict you have already chosen to leave behind. In the past, they could drag you back in through accusation, guilt, or urgency. You would feel compelled to explain yourself once more, to clarify, to prove your intentions. But now, you remain quiet. The silence does not debate the past. It does not relive old battles. It does not return to conversations that only exist to keep you tethered. The message is unspoken, but unmistakable. The territory is no longer available. A boundary that does not speak is harder to challenge. This kind of boundary is different from resistance. Resistance argues. Resistance tries to convince. Silence does neither. It removes permission instead of seeking agreement. Time has already proven this pattern. The man who keeps explaining his limits teaches others that his limits are negotiable. The man who answers intrusion with silence teaches others that his limits are real. They may call it distance, they may call it pride, they may call it withdrawal, but beneath every label is the same frustration. They can no longer shape you by demanding a response. In relationships, the effect becomes unmistakable. Someone crosses a line and expects the cycle to repeat. Tension rises, emotions flare, apologies are traded, and everything resets without change. Silence breaks that rhythm. There is no argument to dissolve the discomfort, no dramatic exchange to release pressure, only the quiet removal of your participation. They feel the separation immediately, not as punishment, but as consequence. Without access to your reaction, they are forced to confront the moment where their behavior meets reality instead of your tolerance. In environments of authority or work, the same boundary appears without announcement. A superior attempts to overwhelm you with urgency, to compel compliance by force of tone rather than substance. You do not resist with defiance or submission. You respond only where responsibility is real and leave the rest unanswered. The silence exposes what is unreasonable without ever naming it. Expectations that once expanded endlessly now contract against a line they cannot see but cannot pass. This discipline also turns inward. When silence becomes your boundary, you must live inside the space it protects. You can no longer soothe discomfort by over-explaining your choices. You cannot soften rejection with excess empathy that erases your own needs. You sit with the weight of your decision and the isolation it creates. There is no applause in that space, no validation, no reassurance. Only the steady recognition that sovereignty requires separation, and separation demands the courage to let others feel what they must feel while you remain where you have chosen to stand, untouched by the noise that once pulled you back across lines you no longer allow to be crossed. Lesson 10. Silence makes some men powerful because it turns presence into authority without a single word being spoken. When you no longer rush to assert yourself, defend your value, or prove your significance, something heavier begins to form around you. Others sense it before they understand it. This is why they fear your silence. It is not emptiness, it is weight. A man who does not fill space with noise forces others to confront the fact that influence can exist without performance, and that realization unsettles anyone who has built their identity on being seen rather than being grounded. You notice this in rooms where many compete to be heard. Voices overlap, opinions collide. Everyone reaches for attention as if significance were a scarce resource. You do not join the scramble. You remain still. You speak only when necessity demands it, and when you do, the room shifts. Not because your voice is louder, but because your silence has already shaped the environment. They realize something they did not expect. The man who speaks least is often the one who has been listening most, observing most, understanding most. The anchor holds steady. Presence does not need volume. This power is not theatrical. It is not built through dominance or intimidation. It emerges from consistency, from restraint, from the refusal to waste words on impulses that do not deserve your breath. Time has already proven this pattern. Men who talk endlessly dilute themselves. Men who speak with measure become impossible to ignore. They are not chasing recognition. They are inhabiting themselves fully enough that recognition arrives on its own. Those who depend on noise feel threatened by this because it exposes how fragile their influence becomes when sound is removed. In leadership, the effect grows sharper. You do not interrupt to display intelligence. You do not speak to signal confidence. You listen, absorb, and allow reality to clarify before you respond. Others feel the difference. They do not look to the loudest voice for direction. They look to the one who does not rush. The silence surrounding you creates gravity. Decisions weighed in quiet carry more substance than promises made in haste. Authority begins to form around you, not because you claim it, but because others recognize that you are not ruled by the same insecurity that rules them. In personal life, this presence is felt in subtler ways. Arguments lose their grip on you. Provocations fail to enter you. People become aware that their ability to move you has limits they cannot reach. You are not distant. You are no longer available for emotional chaos to use as an anchor. The silence around you is not coldness, it is composure. Those who cannot live without reaction misinterpret it as detachment, but beneath their discomfort lies acknowledgement. They are encountering a man whose center does not sit in their approval. Silence also forces a deeper confrontation within yourself. When you stop filling moments with explanation and noise, you are left alone with your own mind. The quiet shows you what remains when performance ends. Restlessness rises, doubt surfaces, old habits push against restraint. But you do not escape them through speech. You endure them. And in that endurance, presence becomes something solid rather than fragile. You begin to inhabit your own life rather than defending it. No one announces this transformation. It does not come with praise. It does not arrive with validation. Yet others feel it when they stand near you. They speak differently. They measure their words. They sense that manipulation has no foothold here, that agitation finds no echo here, that urgency cannot command you here. Silence has turned you into something they cannot easily move. And in that realization, they understand why your silence does not merely unsettle them. It reminds them that some forms of power never ask to be recognized because they already exist without permission. If this message spoke to the part of you that refuses to live a noisy life, subscribe. Stay here. Continue listening in silence. And before you leave, tell me in the comments what silence has revealed about you. Your words will remain, but your discipline will speak louder.